All right, so now we get into the main work that we're going to be looking at, and that is such a fundamental text in the history of rhetoric and rhetorical theory in the West. And we're going to only be able to hit some of the highlights of it. Again, people spend just weeks studying just this one text. The excerpts that you have are not the entire text. It's a book length work. It has several books within it, in fact. So what you have here are some excerpts from all of the different sections of it. The goal of the rhetoric is to provide a comprehensive philosophical and practical treatment of the subject. So he's trying to deal first with all these issues that early folks in the sophistic movement were bringing up. What is it? How does it function? How do you get good at it? How should you train someone? What should its role be within a society? All those kinds of things. And he does it in what seems to be a kind of arrogant manner, in a way, and that is that he's kind of going at it in a way that is very perfunctory. Here it is, man. It is, he says, the counterpart of dialectic. That is to say, a counterpart. One way to think of a counterpart is to say these two things go hand in hand, okay? That one is done not without the other. So we have dialectic, which is kind of like logical reasoning, and then we have rhetoric, which is how we express what it is we find to be true. He defines it as the art of finding the available means of persuasion in every particular circumstance. That's kind of a paraphrase, depending on your translation, but that's what it is, the art of finding. It has no subject matter. So he gets around Plato and Socrates' problem. Well, what's its subject? What's its science? What is it a science of, etc. And Aristotle says, well, it's not a science of anything. It doesn't have its own subject matter. It's not physics. It's not chemistry. It's not economics. Its function is to find. In other words, it is an epistemic pursuit. Okay, it is a discovering process. It is morally neutral. That is to say that it can be used for good or for bad. It's not a thing that has within it a particular ethical set of assumptions. So putting together this work with his previous corpus, that is his previous collection of works on logic or reasoning, we can see that Aristotle in this work is trying to set up a particular framework. First of all, we have epideixis, which is scientific truth. Second, we have a different type of proof, pisteus, which is probable truth, of which there are two species. One, atechnoi, which means inartistic proof, probable truth, which is logos. Okay, we'll get back to these in just a moment. And then entechnoi, which is artistic proof, of which there are basically should be two modes or types there. Sorry about that. There are three in total. Ethos and pathos. Now, you'll often hear people talk about the three modes of proof, Aristotle's three modes of proof. And there are three. They are logos, ethos, and pathos. Okay? Those are the three modes of proof. But technically speaking, or to be more precise, Aristotle actually takes his three modes of pisteus, okay, and he separates them into atechnoi versus entechnoi. Atechnoi would be logos, entechnoi would be ethos and pathos, okay? So there are three modes of pisteus, three types of probable truth, but one is artistic, the other two are artistic, one of them is inartistic. Now, what does he mean by inartistic? Meaning, you can't gussy them up very much. There's not much you can do. They're not malleable the way ethos and pathos are. Logos is logos. Now, let's get into what they are, okay? Because even though these words look very similar to some English language words, they're not identical with the modern English. Let's start with the entechnoi, or artistic proofs. Ethos. It doesn't mean ethics. We get the word ethics from ethos, but it is essentially the notion of credibility. Okay? So in the ancient world, the notion that people had ethos, or an argument had ethos, meant that it had credibility, that it was believable, you see? And that was a very important type of proof. Now notice that Aristotle doesn't say that ethos or credibility helps prove something. No. Very different concept here. Ethos is a form of proof. Think about that for a moment. so that when I get a very credible witness up on the witness stand in a criminal trial who's willing to speak on my behalf, that doesn't just help my case, it proves my case. Why? Because in Aristotle's mind, the notion is that credible people don't lie. It is ipso facto proof of my innocence. So if I go get Billy Graham or the Pope or somebody that everybody believes in, Mother Teresa, and that person gets up on the witness stand and says, Dr. Litton would not do this. I've known him since he was a child. He is not guilty. I am telling you now, he would never lie. I've known him all his life and he doesn't lie. That isn't just helpful to my case. It's proof that I didn't do it. Now that's heavy, right? That's really big, because you say, well, gosh, that seems like it's a bit much, doesn't it? I mean, everybody can be fooled, everybody can be deceived, even if you've known someone all your life, you could be fooled by their behavior. You never know. That's a very modern notion. Remember that people in the ancient world lived in small towns, small communities, and if you've ever lived in a small town, you know who the people are in the town who maybe drink a little bit much, maybe cheat on their wife a little bit. Word gets around in a small community. So in the ancient world, the notion of ethos was a very, very powerful form of proof, because it was something that was, you can make other stuff up, but you can't outlive your reputation, right? So think about that. Ethos is not something that helps your case. It's something that proves your case. Credibility and you can have credibility yourself as a speaker and build credibility. You can bring forward witnesses that have credibility, and you can make arguments that make you seem credible because you seem like a reasonable person by virtue of what you're saying. Okay, so in modern circumstances, it would be things like, did he have credible sources? Because that helps build your ethos as a speaker. Did he say and use the right kinds of words to appeal to an audience so that the audience feels that he's one of them and therefore has credibility or ethos? You see, did he do things or make arguments, or did he craft a speech in such a way as to give himself or his subject ethos? Those are all forms of proof. Now, pathos, there are some words in English that we get from the word pathos. Think in terms of pathetic or sympathy or empathy. That means feeling or emotion. Now, most modern folks today, we're a little skeptical of ethos because, you can know a guy all your life and then all of a sudden you find out he's been up to no good and you didn't realize it, and wow, we got fooled, right? And so we've been let down by a lot of public figures. So we have a little bit less trust, I think, as modern audiences in ethos. Pathos, we have a lot of sort of skepticism about the emotional appeals or the emotional proof. But remember, Aristotle says it's a form of proof. To get an emotional response out of an audience is proof that what you're saying is true. So, in other words, if you say something that makes people feel proud or patriotic or sad or happy or enthusiastic, those emotions in the Greek mind don't exist for no reason. They exist for a very good reason. They're good barometers that what you're telling the audience is true, right? So if I can make my audience cry, something I said was true, something registered with them. People don't go around crying for no good reason. Well, maybe my wife does occasionally, but that's a different story. But for the most part, people don't do that. Now, we are probably just as cynical and skeptical about pathos as a form of proof as we are about ethos, maybe more so, because coming off of the 20th century where we've seen very, very bad people, some of them wearing funny mustaches, who whip up a crowd into an emotional frenzy, and then the crowd goes and does things or says things that aren't very good, right? We've seen people appeal to prejudices and racism and those kinds of things. So in the 21st century, we tend to be relatively skeptical about pathos, but it's still powerful. And we have something to learn from the Greeks. Harnessed the right way, it can be remember, it's morally neutral, right? It can be used for good or bad, but when it's harnessed the right way, both pathos and ethos can be very, very powerful tools. Now, the third form of pisteia, which is atechnoi in artistic, is logos, right? From which we get the word logic. But technically speaking, the word logos in Greek does not mean logic, merely logic. It actually is the same word that in the Gospel of John is used to describe Jesus. John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Actually, the Word for word in that gospel, the Greek, the original Greek, is the word logos. So John is literally saying, in the beginning was the logos, and the logos was with God, and the logos was God. And what is meant by the Greek concept of logos, there's kind of not an exact English translation. It means the logical thought expression, or the thought fully and perfectly expressed. Okay, so there is a notion of logic or reason, but it's also sort of interwoven or hybridized or interbred with this notion of logical reasoning fully expressed. Okay, so what John's basically saying is that Jesus was that personality of the deity, which was the logical expression, okay, or the full expression, logically speaking, of the Godhead. Anyway, it's so don't just think of it just as logic or the wording, okay, or the reasoning. It's the full expression of the logical thought or the logical cognition. Okay, so it isn't a mere syllogism. It's the proper expression and full expression of logical thinking. Okay, we'll move on to the other categories as well in just a moment.